Okay, so we're going to be learning about the life and the teachings of Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. So let me just begin, welcome everyone, with a brief biographical sketch of his life, his time frame in which he was born and active in, and then his passing. He was born in 1823 in a town called Kreisberg, which was in the region of Courland, which would now be like Latvia or Lithuania. He was born into a prominent Litvak Visnagdik family. His father was the rabbi of that town. His father's name was Rabbi Yaakov Rabinowitz. So he actually had a last name. Technically speaking, his name was Reb Tzadok HaKohen Rabinowitz. If he needed to go by a last name, that would have been his official name. Just like any Rebbe has a name, has a passport. So, he had a last name. He was a child prodigy. Again, these are legends, not necessarily subject to verification. The legend is that he finished the Talmud when he was 8 years old. Okay? And he started when he was 3. Yeah. Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. Now we know Reb Tzadok HaKohen Rabinowitz of Lublin, eventually, right? He didn't start out in Lublin, and he didn't start out as a Rebbe. But he's what we would call an Eloi. An Eloi means a genius, a child Eloi, a legendary, studious, and brilliant prodigy. He's somehow related to the Vilna Gaon. I'm assuming he's not a descendant of the Vilna Gaon. That would have been stated explicitly. He's somehow related. I don't know if he descended from a sibling of the Vilna Gaon or a cousin of the Vilna Gaon, something like that. Also a descendant of the Maharal of Prague, who was a famous rabbi whose thought might have influenced his work to some degree, as it did to serious Hasidic thinkers in general. Sadly, when he was 6 years old, he was the apple of his father's eye. His father just adored him and taught him and knew how special he was. He was involved in an accident. I believe he was hit by a carriage or something, like, God forbid now we have car accidents. Then they had people get run over by animals and carriages, stuff like that. So he got seriously injured. And when the person told his father about the injury, you always have to be careful how you tell somebody the news. He must have told it to him to say, that the injury was so serious, it sounded like it was life or death. And maybe his son was going to die, God forbid. And his father had a heart attack, which he died from. Not that minute, not that day, but he ended up dying when little Reb Tzadok was only 6 years old. Thank God he had an uncle who was also a rabbi who took him in and raised him, adopted him, and continued to educate him and to teach him. And then, when he was a little older, sent him to, again, not that old, to a famous rabbi named Reb Yosef Shaul Nathanson. Was well regarded even till today. People, the Torah world, respect him and know of him, who lived in Lublin. He got married when he was 15. I know it sounds like he was old. The bride was probably also 15. Maybe she was 14 or 16, but they were child groom and child bride. You have to understand, when there is a young man of the caliber of learning that Reb Tzadok was on, as a teenager, already people were asking him halachic inquiries. By the time he was bar mitzvah, he was giving over lessons in Torah that the rabbis could have trouble following. That's the level that he was on. So there would be like different families would vie to have the merit to have a son-in-law like that. And one of the ways they would vie is they would say, we will supply for 10 years. I'm giving you an imaginary number. It could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, it could be a lifetime, depending on the situation, for a livelihood for the young couple, so that the budding Talmudic genius doesn't have to worry about how to make a living and will dedicate himself to Torah learning. So he married such a family where the family that he married said, we're going to take care of you. And he moved to the town that his in-laws were in. I heard two different versions of what's essentially the same story. I'll tell you both versions. The version I heard, so that's the version I like because I heard it many years ago, I'll stick to it, is that the family ran a store. I'm not going to tell you what type. Was it Walgreens or 7-Eleven, something in the middle, right? They ran a store. And the wife managed the store, the young woman, capable woman, the parents owned it, but the wife was doing a lot of the day-to-day things. And she would interact with the customers. Now, it could be because, as I mentioned before, there was a great value of having a son-in-law of that stature. It added tremendous cachet, power, reputation to the family that was able to have such a prominent, sage scholar, even if they're 15 or 17 or 18, 19, 20, in their family. So there was supposedly other families that had rivalries with this family who were jealous of this union that catapulted this family to the next level. So you can believe that that is why there were rumors that started that she's not modest. Now, the truth is she might have been more worldly than her husband, more sophisticated in the ways of interacting with men and women in a way that somebody like Reb Tzadok would consider inappropriate. So he was hearing these rumors. He didn't want to believe them. But then, lo and behold, he comes into the store, and I believe it was a Russian high-ranking officer. Again, just to give you context, this is if 1823, add 19, 20 years to that, it would be 1843, 1842, 1843. 10 years earlier, there had been a revolution where the Polish tried to, Poland at that time was under Russian control. I'm assuming they lived in some area that was like what we call Poland, or one of the, what would become Poland. It may not be Poland today, but these boundaries were very flexible. So it might have been I believe it was a Russian high-ranking soldier, officer. And the version I heard is that he shook her hand and they were familiar, meaning the way he was a customer, but the way he talked to her was somebody who's familiar with someone else, like not somebody who met for the first time. And to him, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, maybe the rumors were true. And from that moment, he said, I want a divorce. Yeah, he's a kid. He doesn't really understand. So he wants a divorce, and his wife says, no, you misread what happened. This is a very powerful person. You kind of have to play by the rules a little bit in order not to they could hurt you. They have a lot of power. And I didn't do it, God forbid, because I'm some licensee. What's the word? Licentious woman. That's what? Licentious. I did this because I have to run a store without getting killed, basically, without getting into trouble. You have to give me a little leeway here. He wouldn't hear of it. He didn't believe her. But she said, I refuse to give you a get. This is preposterous. Now, I heard in some Israeli website that I'm not really familiar with, so I don't know if I trust it. I don't know anything about the stores. They tell the same story, but this story is with, instead of a general store, which I like my version, it makes more sense, there was an inn. And what he saw is like he saw her in a room in the inn taking care, like serving breakfast to this man. And in a way that made him think, oh, you were in the room with him together. It's called yichud. It's called being in the room with somebody who's not your husband, and he's a Kohen, so he became very he became very worked up about it and said, she's like a sota to me. Now again, I don't like that version. Sounds a little, I like my version. It's a store, it's not a hotel room, it's not the Marriott, but okay, be that as it may. That the second version is to be Malamed Chos and Reb Tzadok, that it had to be something more serious than a hotel room together. The first version is more realistic. That he saw her acting in a way that he thought was inappropriate with this high-ranking soldier in the store. She won't give him a get. There is a recourse for a man who will not be granted. You have to, since the time of Rabbi Gershon 1,000 years ago, you can't divorce your wife without her being willing to get divorced. So what do you do if the woman isn't willing to get the divorce? There is a recourse called the Heter, Maeh, Rabbanim. This is Reb Tzadok, by the way. I'm supposed to do Rav Kook. I got a little confused, but you're going to like it. You're going to like it. Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. So he goes, I'm gonna get a Heter Maeh Rabbanim, permission from 100 rabbis to remarry. They'll have a get waiting for her if she wants it. And then he sets off over Europe to meet 100 rabbis to sign this document that would allow him to essentially get remarried. But he used it in the typical Jewish fashion as 2 for 1. If I'm already getting a Heter Maeh Rabbanim, I want to meet not just any rabbis, but I want to meet some of the more interesting rabbis. And I want to get to know, I want to learn, and I want to introduce myself to them. So I make these connections. Who knows? So it's almost like a journey. It's the opposite of most movies where you set off, the hero sets off on a journey, but he's going to come back and get the woman. Here it's the opposite. Here he's going to set off on this journey, and at the end he's going to be free of his wife. So he goes from rabbi to rabbi. And one version of the story is that he was a little bit of a show-off. Or maybe he needed to be a show-off. He said, look, when he would meet them, he said, you don't really know me that well. We're meeting for the first time. Most of the rabbis didn't know him. Some of them had heard about him. Some of them had never heard about him. Let's make an agreement. I have a request that I need your signature for the Heter Maeh Rabbanim. But since you don't know me, it doesn't matter. I can tell you a story. You're not really aware of the other side, so how would you know to listen to me? But let's have a conversation in Torah. If you're impressed, or another version of it is, we'll see who's the greater in Torah. If it's me, you have to agree to sign. So one of the two or something in between. Anyway, rabbi after rabbi, he shows how great he is in Torah learning. You see, look, this guy's obviously a Torah scholar to the highest caliber. We're going to assume we can trust him because there's an idea. I'm not saying that's why they do it, but there's a concept like if somebody's a great Torah scholar, you give them a little bit of nemanut, you give them a little more trust than you would an ordinary person. So, okay, so they get the benefit of the doubt. Just trying to explain why they would then, believe him more than before. Okay. So he's making his way through these 100 rabbis. One of the rabbis, for example, is a mayor of Pramishlan. And some versions of the story is he was so impressed with the mayor of Pramishlan that he became a Chosid then. I don't believe the story. I just don't believe it. The mayor of Pramishlan was a great tzaddik. And the story is that that with him in the for that time, maybe he spent the Shabbos there, and there was somebody who was going to another Rebbe, but he liked spending that Shabbos. The Mayor Parmeshlan, he offered him 100 ruble, and the Rebbe refused. He said, "You were going to your own Rebbe. I'm not taking money that wasn't belonging to me." The guy insisted. He said, "I'll give my Rebbe also another 100 ruble." He said, "No." So the guy thought he was going to be outsmart the Rebbe, and he went to the Rebbe's wife. He says, "I want to give you 100 ruble." And the Rebbe's wife ran to her husband. He says, "How dare you send him to me? I'm not going to take money that's not ours." Meaning the wife understood that this was a chassid of another Rebbe. When young Reb Tzadok saw that, he was very impressed. So this version says he became a chassid then and there. I don't believe that story. But what I believe is, he said, "Wow, these people are righteous." What it is he started seeing that as a misnagid, a lot of the rumors he heard about Hasidim were not true. It takes a long time to break the stereotypes of what you're told as a young person to change your mind about people, right? So that's the problem politically, the right and the left. Everyone's like in their little echo chamber, and they're talking about the other group, and nobody knows what it's like to be, chas v'shalom, to compare that to Hasidim and Misnagdim. But so he started breaking through his biases that he had grown up with against the Hasidim. He was against the Hasidim as a young man before these encounters. He loses one of these Talmud battles to the Chiddushei Harim. Was a contemporary. The Chiddushei Harim was the right-hand man of the Kotzker Rebbe. Could you say that a person has two right-hand men? Or does that not make sense? Like from linguistic, because you only have one right hand. Unless you're ambidextrous. The Kotzker Rebbe had two lieutenants. The Chiddushei Harim, who was the founder of the Gerach Hasidim. They now have hundreds of thousands of Hasidim in the world. And the Maeh of Ishbitzer, who has much more brilliant ideas than almost anyone that ever existed in the Hasidic world, and yet there's almost no Hasidim. Shows you Hasidim, it's not about ideas, it's about charisma, it's about shidduchim, it's about business, it's about a lot of things, it's about community. Ideas are, number 11 on the list. They're not important, not that important. Then he comes, again, I don't know the exact order, he comes to the Ishbitzer Rebbe Mordechai Yosef Leiner. Now again, this is not a shiur about Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner, but if I could just say, I need this chair, you can take it, sit over there. If I could just say this one thing, Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner is the most innovative Rebbe that ever lived, with maybe Reb Nachman of Breslov a close second. Somebody said, "What about the Alter Rebbe of Chabad? He's not the most innovative Rebbe." I'm like, no, he's not. He's brilliant. He was a Gaon. He was a greater Gaon than Mordechai Yosef Leiner. Not that it's a competition, but he didn't want to be groundbreaking, saying things that no one else said before. The things he said were actually all very well thought out. With almost everything he said had a source. Again, what he did with those things is create what I would say the chiddush of the Alter Rebbe that was greater than, let's say, Mordechai Yosef Leiner, is that he came out with one book called the Tanya, which outlines a psychological understanding of the soul, fitting it into Jewish sources, that no one else quite wrote a book like that. But overall, the general whole amount of ideas that Mordechai Yosef Leiner put out was more innovative than the Alter Rebbe. So again, same thing with Reb Nachman. Reb Nachman had a certain stylistic, emotional way of speaking that was much more powerful for those who are emotional than either the Alter Rebbe of Chabad or Mordechai Yosef line of Ishbitzer. So again, you're comparing apples and oranges. So it's not like this Rebbe is the greatest. They're each the greatest in their own specific area of what they did. So in the terms of the area of what Ishbitzer is famous is innovation. Innovation even in areas that other rabbis would say is veering on, I don't want to use the word heresy because I think it gets overused, but veering on, what's the word below heresy? What? Yeah, well, give me like a word that's like, what? Radicalism. Okay, I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for. Radical. What? Not extremism. Not extreme. Something not progressive. So lesser than heresy. Potentially transgressive. Not transgressive, but transgressive. It can lead to transgressive. Okay. Anyway, hi, Yosef. We're gonna keep going strong. If you have a comment,
iconoclastic. I think that's the word you're looking for.
What's the word?
Iconoclastic.
Iconoclastic. I don't know, but if you have any more comments, send it to me in the comments.
Sure.
Thank you. So again, I'm not going to spend all day looking for a word. but what we're trying to do now is we're trying to understand what happened when he comes in to meet Mordechai Yosef Leiner Ishbitzer. So the version I have is that he comes in to meet him, and he starts talking to him, and Mordechai Yosef Leiner says, look, do me a favor. Right now, Mincha is coming. I don't have time to really sit and talk to you. Stay for Mincha and Mariv, and after Mariv, we'll have a conversation. Now, a lot of times the rabbi gives a shir for 10, 20, 30 minutes between Mincha and Mariv. You'll see some rabbis even do daf yomi between Mincha and Mariv. So in Ishbitzer at that time, and Mordechai Yosef Leiner would give a Gemara shir, a short Gemara shir. It wasn't maybe an hour, but it was a half hour, 40 minutes. So he's giving a Gemara shir. And Reb Tzadok is hearing things. Tzadok, again, knows all of the Talmud by heart by now. He knows all of the Rambam by heart by now. He knows all of Nachmanides by heart. He knows all of the Shulchan Aruch by heart. He knows the Zohar by heart. But he never heard the things that Ishbitzer is saying. So he goes, this is not like, I'm beginning to like Chassidim. I'm impressed. But this, I'm impressed with their tzidkus, with their righteousness. But this Rebbe is Manishtana Rebbe Azeb, we call our Rebbes. How is this Rebbe different from all other Rebbes? There's something not the same about what he's teaching. So they had their meeting, and they were both very impressed. And the Ishbitzer said, "Look, I'm gonna give you what you want." And he said, look, I appreciate it. I just want to tell you, I don't know what I can do about it, but there's something, what you've taught me that I've never heard, and I'd be very interested to learn more about. Here it was more like intellectual curiosity. So he said, I'll tell you what, just do me this favor, stay for Shabbos. He stayed for Shabbos. And the way the story goes is he's there Friday night, and the Rebbe is teaching. The Rebbe has a tish. Shabbos morning, and the Rebbe is teaching. They have weiter, more kiddush, whatever, lunch. And then Shabbos afternoon, by Shalosh Shudas, he said, the Rebbe put into me a fire into my heart. And that's when he became a Chassid of the Ishbitzer Rebbe. No, the Ishbitzer. Yeah. So now we have to understand the relationship between the student, Reb Tzadok, and the Rebbe, Mordechai Yosef, is a very unique relationship because it's not like Reb Tzadok grew up as a Chassid, going to a school where the Rebbe was like a Chassid who was teaching in the way of Chassidus. He grew up in the other team. He grew up with the Misnagdim who disrespected the Chassidim. He didn't learn Chassidus. He learned some Kabbalah, which is similar to Chassidus, but not the same. And now, all of a sudden, he was 20 or 21. He's still very young, but you have to understand that what he knew at 20 is the equivalent of like 8 PhDs. Think of it like that. Somebody who, like a brilliant professor, was able to do 8 PhDs, probably going to be 50 by then, right? So that's the level that he's on. He's a Gaon. He's a tremendous. He's close to the Vilna Gaon in terms of his learning, the level of learning at that age. At 20, at least a young Vilna Gaon. Maybe the Vilna Gaon was already there when he was 17, and it took him to get there by 20. So how do you become a Chassid when you know more than the Rebbe? How can you do it? And the answer is twofold. The answer is that there's two ways that a Chassid and a Rebbe, or a Talmud and a Rebbe, can have a student-teacher relationship. One is that the student is clearly the student, and the teacher is clearly the teacher. The student doesn't know, and the teacher knows, and the teacher teaches, and now the student knows. And even occasionally then, once in a while, the student will eventually outshine the teacher. Like in the time of, let's say, Moshe Cordovero, his Kabbalah teacher became his student eventually. It happens once in a while, right? But this wasn't the case. When Reb Tzadok became a Chassid, he knew more Gemara, he knew more Halacha, maybe even more Zohar than his Rebbe. So what did the Rebbe add? It wasn't just sometimes you went to the Rebbe for inspiration, for spiritual inspiration. So that could have been part of it. But the other part of it is that there was not there when you're learning Torah, it's very important it's very important that you understand Torah. How does he understand Torah? Of course, that's the whole. Are you saying Reb Tzadok doesn't understand Torah? There's different levels of understanding Torah. There's an emotional intelligence of the Torah. There's a spiritual intelligence of the Torah. And just because you have, let's say, the intellectual understanding of the Torah, doesn't mean you have the emotional or the spiritual understanding of the Torah. And when you're missing those things, you're missing an element of how to relate to the Torah. And even further, let's say, for example, there's somebody who went through the whole Talmud by heart. So why does he need to go to yeshiva? Why does he need a Rosh Yeshiva? What is he going to learn from the Rosh Yeshiva? He could actually test the Rosh Yeshiva, and it could turn out that he knows every word of the Talmud word for word by heart, and the Rosh Yeshiva doesn't. So what's the point of going to hear a shir from a Rosh Yeshiva? The answer is the Rosh Yeshiva knows how to learn. It's not just information; it's a way. We were talking about in Reb Chaim of Brisk, a derech halimud, a way, an approach to learning. Just learning, I don't want to call it haphazard, but without an approach, may be lacking some cohesion in your methodology of learning. So add on to that if your learning is lacking in its kind of spiritual component, which, by the way, even Misnagdim started realizing that because they have the Musar movement. If they felt that learning itself was enough, some Misnagdim do feel, but if they all felt it was enough, there wouldn't be Rabbi Shol Salon, wouldn't have to start a Musar movement. Another way of putting it, this is a little more radical, is that I gave this analogy yesterday in the shul, but I'll give it here again today. We're in a room. There's a table, there's chairs, there's bookshelves, there's refrigerators, there's sinks, there's bathrooms. Imagine the lights were off. Everything would still be here, but in the dark, you'd have to move around very slowly. You'd have to feel each thing and identify it. This is a table. What is this? It's a chair. No, actually, it's a stool. And then when you have to move quickly, what God forbid happens, you could trip and fall. The very thing that's supposed to be for your use becomes a stumbling block. Without the Ishbitzer, there was something missing. He was missing a certain light in his Torah. Again, it seems like a very almost like anti-Misnagdic thing to say. I want to maybe dial it back a little bit because it sounds like without Chassidus or without Ishbitzer, you're in the dark. Okay, maybe not pitch dark, but it's like the shades are drawn versus the opening the shades. It's not lit up yet. You don't have enough light in it. Now let's actually go on and learn a little bit of what the Reb Tzadok says. But before I do that, let me just conclude with, he becomes a Chosid, but rather than becoming a communal rabbi or even a Rebbe, because he spent 7 years with the Maeh Shilach, and then the Maeh Shilach passes away, and instead of trying to be his own Rebbe, he follows Reb Eger. Now, Reb Eger is a tremendous Torah scholar, but his work doesn't compare to Reb Tzadok's work. But because Reb Eger was the senior Chosid, he became his Chosid, not like every other Chosid. He was like the right hand, like level. He was like a Talmud Chaver, when you're like a student, but also an equal. So that's how he was with Reb Eger. They continued to learn and share together. And then it was only after Reb Eger passed away in, I believe, like 1887 or something like that, for the last 12, 13 years of his life, he became a Rebbe in Lublin. That's why he's called Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. Because Reb Eger they were called the Lubliner Chassidim. There might even be a shul somewhere in Israel that's connected to the Lubliner Chassidim. Most of the time, for many years, he studied and he wrote. But his writing is very hard for most people to figure out. So this is my story with the Tzidkas HaTzadik. This is a book called the Tzidkas HaTzadik. The Tzidkas HaTzadik is what a lot of people consider Reb Tzadok's most important work. And the question is why? He wrote, we only have, 10, 20% of his writings, which would take up about 15 or so books, like a very densely packed. Okay, it could if they're going to be reissued with like footnotes, it'll end up taking like 25 or 30 or 40. Like if they reissue it with proper annotations and footnotes and possible explanations, it could end up taking up most of a bookshelf. Not in its current form, because now they're just beginning to unravel this work. Now, my story is that I started reading it. I think it was in the summer. I don't know. Over 20 years ago. 20 something years ago. And it's very hard. And I almost gave up. It's very interesting. The beginning is not so hard, but then it becomes hard. And I remember I took it into the Hollywood. My parents lived in LA at the time, up until yesterday, basically. They lived near the Hollywood Hills. So when I was a teenager, I'd often go biking up the Hollywood Hills as close as you could get to the Hollywood sign. Anyway, so I go into the Hollywood Hills. I'm no longer on a bicycle. I have a car, rent the car, Enterprise. I take it into the hills, and I find somewhere a bench to sit on in the shade. And for 2 or 3 days, I'm learning Tzadok, Tzidkas HaTzadik. And that's when the breakthrough came in, where it went from darkness to light, where I all of a sudden felt kind of like what I described from the dark room. Everything is there, but I didn't really know what it is and how to use it. And all of a sudden, the lights started coming on. And that's, by the way, that's the only real way to break into Reb Tzadok is to study him, get a little lost in the woods, so to speak, and then just keep powering through it until the light starts coming on. I have a good friend in Israel who together we were into the Maeh Shiloach already for 35 years, almost 35 years. And then he started learning Tzidkas HaTzadik, and he told me, he said, I'm learning, I really love it, but I'm hitting this wall, the same wall that I hit, but this is more recently. He says, I guess it's Lublin, and they davened at his caver. And then the lights came on. And I've been able to learn it ever since then. No questions. You could write it to me and send it in. Take a piece of paper and send it up. Yeah. Let's learn a few things from Tzidkas HaTzadik. I wrote down 8 ideas. Well, if we do 5 of them, will be more than enough. Number 1 is the idea of Bereisha Chashecha B'Hada Nahara. Things start and it's dark, and then comes the light. The beginning of Tzidkas HaTzadik parallels the Gemara and Brachot that talks about when do we say the Shema? In the evening and in the morning. And the Talmud says, why in the evening and in the morning? Because that's how creation works. Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, Yom Echad. First comes evening, and then comes day. Because you can't have day without a night that precedes it. You can't have an answer without a question. You can't have redemption without slavery. By the way, who did I hear this first from? I heard a shir on this from Rabbi Brandwine, and then I realized how the antecedent to what we call the Ratzon L'Kabel and Ashlagi and Kabbalah, the idea of the desire to receive, which is very much part of exactly how to understand that in the framework of the Kabbalah of Rabbi Yehuda Ashlag. There's a precedent to that in the teachings of Reb Tzadok and the Maeh Shiloach. The wording is different. Yeah, we're both. I'm also doing it. You don't have to. What's the connection between Rabbi Yehuda Ashlag and the Ratzon L'Kabel and this teaching of Reb Tzadok that I'm teaching now about first the darkness and then the light? Reb Tzadok, like his Rebbe, says one of the most important teachings that you're going to ever know in Torah is that in order for there to be positive thing, it generally comes through an emptiness, what we call a chisaron, which means a lack of, a deficiency. And particularly when the deficiency is felt, when the person feels lacking in some area, that creates a vacuum that will then, for example, turn into tefillah, into prayer. Meaning, if I feel like I have everything, what am I davening for? There's nothing to daven. Davening is because you have a need for something that you're lacking, and you daven for that thing. So that's like a very similar concept to the Ratzon L'Kabel. I don't have something, I'm deficient. I want it, so I want to receive it. And so number two is how to use that as a focus for something. How to get the nothing to turn into a something. How to get the emptiness, like a cup, gives me the opportunity to fill it with water, right? So for example, when I pray for something, I could pray that I'm not feeling well, so I want to be healed. But what if I also prayed for other people who need healing? What if I prayed for the world? So how to then take like your own personal travails and create empathy out of it for other people, and then use that as a channel to receive for them and for yourselves. Number three, a quote from the Zohar that he says, the Zohar says this many times. This is one of the foundations of the Zohar, not just a quote. Our awakening from below, a spiritual awakening from below, creates a counterpart of an awakening from above. But then he goes further than that. He explores it in the natural context of time. So he starts off by using a 24-hour period of evening and morning to explore the relationship we have with God as mirroring in the changes that are reflected in nature. Now, rather than just understand that the sun and the moon and the earth are in some type of rotation that creates a 12 equal measures of day and night at some part of the world, and obviously not equal in the summer or winter, and so on. Rather than just understand that scientifically, he takes the Gemara and says, just like there are watches on earth, there's watches in heaven, meaning the time frames of change within any given period are a reflection of some divine imperative that's manifesting on the earth. So there's this synchronicity, or I should call it an in-sync calendar, just like there's the Jewish calendar of the holidays. There's a 24-hour calendar in which God is manifesting certain energies within the confines of those periods. And that's why he says the Shema, which is our Kabbalat our way of entering into a relationship, a dynamic relationship with God, with understanding the nature of God's unity, and to some degree the Tefillah, they're different. But more the Shema revolves around this consciousness of now is the evening. There's a difference between evening and day. What's the main avoda of the evening? Remember when there was no lights in the parable? There's no lights at night. I mean, we have electricity now, but let's go with most of world history. You can't see, so the main thing is not to get harmed. And today, at night, the main thing is not to harm yourself, not to do things as you're not busy working. So you could say the Shema all evening, because that's the whole evening theoretically needs protection from getting hurt or hurting yourself. The morning is bukumecha, when you get up. The main thing is when you get up, start your day right. Once you start your day right, then automatically we hope that the rest of your day, the focus of your day, even though you have to work and deal with things and people, will be done in the proper way. That's why he explains why the Kriya Shema, in the morning, there's only a more limited time when you're getting up, the time that you're getting up, not when you're up the whole day. So 3 hours of the morning rather than all day, as opposed to the night when you have all night, according to the rabbis. That's also something. Yeah, similar. Yeah. Yeah. He talks about that also. That's number 3. Number 4. That was 3 and 4. Number 4 is how to understand the difference between the avoda of going to sleep versus the waking up in the laws of Shema. Number 5 is the avoda of talis and tefillin. He talks about, look, that when you put on the talis, on the one hand, it's or makif. You're surrounded by the talit. On the other hand, the tzitzit, the threads, are supposed to remind you of the Taryag mitzvot. There's different energies. And tefillin, also, the head tefillin says, which means that the world will see that God's name is on you. It's an indicator of our relationship with God, so the world has a certain respect for that. Or they don't, but they should. And when you're in talit and tefillin, he says, you're not going to sin. But already like today, he doesn't recommend staying in talit and tefillin all day. Not like some people in Israel, because we're not on the level, just in case we have an improper thought. So we should be able to control ourselves. So in a half hour, an hour that we're davening, we can do it. And hopefully it sets the tone for the rest of the day. He says a lot more on that. And then the Torah of the Jewish people. What do I mean, the Torah of the Jewish people? He says that if you're a scholar, you can relate to God through Torah. But if you're not a scholar, you can relate to God through loving the Jewish people. If you love Torah, then the Torah is God's gift. And you'll get it through loving Torah. But if you don't love Torah because you don't understand it, or you just don't have a relationship with it, he says, at least God gave us each other, so the respect and admiration and love we have for one another is I don't want to say replacement of Torah, but it's in the place of the Torah. He says that. And that's number 6. Number 7, he says it's similar with Torah and tefillah. He says there's a lot of people, by the way, they go to shul every day. They definitely go to shul on Shabbos, and they daven. They're not big learners. He says because the point is the same. You need to have his chassidut, which means you need to have renewal, new ideas. Remember we talked about the lights going on in Torah? The real inspiration when you have either actually new ideas, or even if it's an old idea, but like the light clicks on when you study it, and it's like sweet and good. So Torah scholars get it through Torah study. But if you're not a Torah scholar, then you should have a mechadesh b'tuba b'chol yom tov. That's in the prayer. We say God renews the world. The point of prayer isn't just to mumble words. Because remember, they're coming out of Katz and of Simcha B'nu Pshischa and the Yida Kadosh. So it's all about having a relationship, a real relationship with God. God who renews the work of the universe constantly every day. So it's to tap into the newness of God making the world today in a way that it didn't exist yesterday. That's the whole point of, let's say, Shar Yichud Ve'emunah, the second section of the Tanya of the Alter Rebbe. But that's very much what davening is about. So you can get it through Torah or Tefillah, which is also reminiscent of why there are certain people, for example, who Torah umnato, they don't have to, he says, why are there great scholars like the Rashbi? They don't have to stop to daven. He says, because the spiritual light is in the Torah. They don't even need davening. Again, we're not on that level. We still have to daven. But, which, by the way, this is kind of reminiscent of what we were saying about Reb Cook, that he says there's certain tzaddikim, I don't know if I got to say it last week, certain tzaddikim, they do certain things because everyone has to do it. They're stuck with it. They can't break from the community, but it's not for them. It's for the klal. So, number 8 is washing your hands. What's so special about washing your hands? He has a lot of things about the morning rituals. And he says, washing your hands, this is a very key teaching in Ishbitzer, which is washing your hands represents siluk nigiyot. Nigiyot means when you're involved in a matter and you can no longer see objectively. Your personal involvement tilts your version of events. Like you ever have this thing with someone and they say what happened, and you're like, I just don't remember it that way. Is the person lying? Yeah, could be. Or the person's left out so many things or saw it in such a skewed way because that's the way that benefits them. Like I like to say that a lot of people's vantage point is their advantage point. They like to reinterpret what happened based on what's going to be more advantageous to them. That's why there's so many lawyers fighting about the same case, and each side says this is how it went down, and this was what should be the law, because each side is trying to look at their advantage point. But in the Kutzker tradition, you have to have a little honesty with yourself. So you have to start to try to push away your personal agendas to be able to be more truthful about yourself. So that's called siluk negiyot, and that's a very important thing. Anyone have any questions? Yes.
As you said very well, lawyers like that, but I think in personal life, the people fight and it's to their advantage, even if they're right or wrong. They discriminately, they fight just because they want to be right, not necessarily because they are right, because that's their nature. And people, I don't think are such pacifists, if that's a correct word. I think that people have this personal feeling that they have to be right, even if they're not.
How many of us go around thinking like what I could have said to that guy, a year ago, right? We have that need, Okay, yes, Judy. So Judy's asking a very, very good question. Why didn't Reb Tzadok give his wife the benefit of the doubt? Look, I think he himself, at some point in his life, understood that he had made a mistake. He was young. He was a kanoi. He was he was very super religious. And very super religious people, sometimes they create this is what's right and that's what's wrong. It's it's very clear to them. And that lack of ambiguity or gray areas doesn't allow them to see it in any other way. At that point in his life, he really thought he had to divorce his wife. That's just what he thought. Might have been a mistake, but that's what happened. The benefit we got out of it is how he became a chassid. That wouldn't have happened had he stayed married. I'm not saying it's worth it, but that's what the outcome was. Okay, one more question because it's 11:30 and I try to. Say it again. Okay, so there's a lot of rituals that have to do with water rituals. Water is cleansing. So, for example, washing the hands represents, physically, if you have something on your hands, the water will wash it away. So our hearts also have something on them when we start seeing things our way. So in a relationship, if I start fighting with somebody because I'm defending my position of how I see the way things are, and they're defending their position the way things they think should be, and neither of us is saying the truth. So, we got to do a little hand washing. Mikvah is another one. There's a beautiful teaching about mikvah that what happens is the sin is a discoloration of our pure selves, and the mikvah washes us off of whatever was accrued through life, so to speak. But again, it's not just the literal washing, it's the kavanah that you have with it. Any one of these mitzvot on their own is not going to be effective, and that's another big part of Ishbitzer, is what's the goal of the mitzvah is, of course, to do God's will. But in addition, God gives us mitzvot similar to Maimonides, but very different, with a specific intention of how it's going to make us better and improve the world. So it's not like some other teachings that we're learning about Reb Chaim of Brisk, for example, says, no, the halacha is the halacha. You just do God's will. You have to understand how to do it, but it's not for you to understand why you do it. Or that's not your problem, really. No, here we want to understand why we do it, not to decide whether we will or won't do it, but to help us be more effective so that the goal of the mitzvah, if there's multiple levels of goals, in addition to just doing God's will, it's what God's will do to us through that mitzvah. Like the Kotzker Rebbe, he asked a young person who came to him and said, I've gone through the Talmud, I think, 5 times, or whatever amount of times. And the Kotzker Rebbe said, but how many times did the Talmud go through you? Okay, thank you guys. Board.